Well, welcome families to today's empowering episode. We have Dr. Scott Bergman with us today. Thanks so much for joining us, Doc. It's an honor and a privilege.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, it was so great, Doc, to hear you speak a couple of weeks ago, actually, over here in Plymouth, Michigan, where you spoke at the Metagenics conference. And I was just really elated and excited with your presentation and thought to myself, you know what, we got to bring this guy on the podcast and tell everyone more about the ketogenic conversation, because I've been having that conversation with our patients here at the clinic a lot. And I was like, man, let's just make this into a podcast and reach more people with this great information. But before we go there, Doc, we always start with two questions just to get people, more comfortable with the person who we're talking to. So, Doc, real quick on the Family Wellness Podcast, what does family look like for you?
Well, personally, my family is my wife and my son. He's in high school. He's a great kid. My wife and I have been married for 25 years.
Awesome.
And almost bringing it to a medical point of view, family to me is connective tissue. Family to me is your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, your uncles. We have a lot of family. I grew up on the East Coast, but somehow we've all migrated over to California here, and our get-togethers are somewhere in the range of about 40 to 45 people, and it's warm, it's fun, it's communication, and I don't know where I would be without my family.
Brilliant, Doc. That is awesome. I've been doing this for a while now. I've never had someone have that response with family as connective tissue. So that's great. I love it. Very good. It makes me think of your whole polar and gooey thing, which I have stolen, by the way. I hope you don't mind.
Excellent.
Because I love that.
I wanted to get out there, and I want people to think of it in however it makes it simple for conversations to occur.
Brilliant. Awesome. So the second question we always ask here, Doc, is, we love Michigan, so we're all about the mitten. In fact, we say that we are smitten with the mitten. So maybe, I know you're out there in California, it's always sunny and you're just having a good time. And I think you mentioned you're from the East Coast, but is there anything that you love about the great state of Michigan?
Well, I've spoken in Michigan a couple times, and without a doubt, the warmth of the people, the glow when I've had an opportunity to speak with people in between the seminars, how warm and how kind people are, and how clear. There's that. For some reason, Michigan seems to be the bluntness of the East Coast with the kindness of the Midwest, and it kind of melds. So I always have a great time coming and enjoying meeting new people from that area. It's awesome.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks so much for that. We really appreciate it. Again, we just love Michigan so much. I also am a fan of California. Need to get out there more often. We got friends out there in San Francisco and all of that, so it's always a good time we can get out there. But yeah, Doc, let's just jump into the meat and potatoes here. We're going to be talking about food today. And so, like I said, as a doc, I've found myself having this conversation with a lot of patients lately, and I wanted to just try and bring some clarity to this overarching concept or umbrella, if you will, with ketogenics. And I love the way that you break it down. I was watching a few of your Metagenics videos and the webinars that you've done, and then got to hear you speak a couple weeks ago. And so I really wanted to just baby step through just a number of components and bring some clarity, again, back to that clarity you talked about with us Michiganders, to how can we really apply the ketogenic lifestyle for really wherever that person happens to be at. Now, a lot of our listeners are, mothers, parents, husbands, wives, that sort of thing. So I really think they're going to mostly fall into that lifestyle pillar, if you will, that you have. I love your 4 pillars, by the way, which we'll get into. But I also think there are some people who may want to well, what if I want to adapt this for performance? Or what if I want to work with, a functional medicine doc or, something like that for more of a clinical type thing to help with releasing weight, other health goals that we might have, things of
Yeah.
that nature. So I think to start out with, and also by way of introduction, I love this idea of not only watching what we eat in terms of what's going into our system, but then also the timing of when we eat, I think is just really profound, and you can really do some cool things with that. And that doesn't really cost any money. Like, I love these things where it's just like if you can tweak the timing of your intake of your calories, you can
Sure.
really, like biohack some really awesome physiologic adaptations. So let's just start from the top here, Doc. Can you just let us know, when we talk about ketogenics, so what is a ketone or a ketone body? So just very basic.
Yeah, so when we talk about the ketogenic diet, we're talking about, number one, using ketones for fuel. So a ketone, I'll say it how I know it, and then I'll turn it around into a way that we can remember it. But a ketone is a water-soluble molecule that converts or is converted from fat to a ketone body in the liver. So what we're able to do is we're able to take fats and via our liver convert that into a ketone body. That ketone body then converts into a form of a fuel, acetyl-CoA, that can then be brought right to the mitochondria to feed the cell, to feed our muscles, to feed almost pretty much every organ in the body. So a ketone body is a different form of fuel than we have been taught of, which is essentially just been, we've got carbs, we've got proteins, we've got fats. Well, ketones essentially come from fats. Proteins will break down to amino acids, carbs will break down into glucose, but essentially fats, when we're metabolizing them, we are breaking them down into ketones, getting those fats into the cell so we can use that as energy. So it's a different form of energy.
Gotcha. Okay, but it's fundamentally coming from the metabolization of fats.
Absolutely.
And that occurs in our liver.
Yes.
Correct. Okay, there's not another organ or tissue that does ketogenesis or makes ketones.
From what I know, it's predominantly in the liver, and then those ketone bodies get into the bloodstream, and then they can get to any tissue.
Gotcha. Okay, so I eat some fats, they go to my liver makes ketones. So that's a good point. So if our liver's not really healthy, are we going to be very efficient at making or synthesizing these ketones?
Exactly right. It's very, very difficult. Okay. So when we hear about maybe some of the barriers of the ketogenic diet,
right,
or people having a hard time getting into ketosis, then we always look at gut and liver issues, going through some sort of detoxification. And what that means is if we can't break fats down to use as fuel, they will then be stored. So we are either storing fat or we are burning fat. We are not doing both. So if we are having a hard time losing fat, whether it's from our day-to-day lives, whether it's from a diet, whether it's from very specific type of exercise, we have to look at what we've called metabolic flexibility. Our body's ability to not only burn carbohydrates, but our body's ability to burn and break down fats into these very, very specific molecules to use for energy.
I'm just taking some notes here, Doc, because I'm learning more even just as we're talking here. So, all right. So I really want to break this down for our listeners. So again, breaking things down, pun intended, right? Right. So again, I eat these fats, but then you said I have to break down the fats. So then in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, how do we break down those fats? So lipases come to mind. So bile from our gallbladder is an emulsifier that emulsifies the fats. So again, if our liver and gallbladder are not functioning well, then we're not going to be breaking down those fats. Are we tracking?
We're tracking. And if you remember when we were speaking and we were talking about the concept of NRD, nutrient reserve deficiency, if someone is low in choline, if someone is low in inositol, if someone genetically has a COMT variant deficiency, we're going to have a harder time breaking those things down. Knowing what someone's genetic propensity is always helpful. And then therefore, from there, knowing what kind of nutrients that person might need to improve fat metabolism.
Right. Right. And I love that you're also a chiropractor, because I love chiropractic adjustments, but then I love how we can talk about the neurology, like you mentioned the vagus nerve in your lecture here too. And so that makes me go into a whole discussion of, well, if we're always chronically stressed out, like let's just even say, you know, we're not abusing alcohol, like we're not destroying our liver, we're eating organic food and being healthy. But if we're always stressed and we don't have good output to our vagus nerve, then digestion and the release of these lipases and bile from the gallbladder to break down the fat, that's going to be a wash, you know?
Right. So we're either in fight or flight, sympathetic stress, where we're running away from tigers. And if we're running away from tigers, our body really doesn't care about metabolizing and breaking down our foods. So back to your point, we need to upregulate the parasympathetic. The vagus nerve runs straight from the brain to the gut. If there's any kind of inflammation in the gut, we're going to have some sort of emergency response sent to the brain. The brain is then going to upregulate the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So sympathetic nervous system goes up, digestion goes down. So specific things like lumbar adjustments for our colon, for mid-back adjustments for digestion, like the pancreas and the liver and the gallbladder, and T5, T6 for the stomach, and even cervical adjustments. All of those help with our nervous system to allow the body to work better. And if the body has all of the foundational nutrition reserves in the body, then we just get out of the way and we let the body do what it's supposed to do, right?
Absolutely. Love it. Brilliant. I love how just within the first question, we're already like miles away from what I planned to talk about.
From where we started,
But to kind of bring it back. So, okay, in a perfect world, in an ideal healthy situation, so I eat fats, they go into my system, I'm not stressed, so I can break down the fats, and I break down these fats, and then they go to my liver, and my liver's healthy, so my liver can do this thing where we biotransform and metabolize the fats into ketones. So now I have ketones circulating in my blood, right?
That's right.
So, we're there.
We're there. So once we have a level of ketone bodies between 0.5 and 3.0 millimoles, that's the beautiful window there, but we definitely want to get above 0.5. We are in a state of ketosis, and specifically nutritional ketosis.
Nutritional ketosis. Perfect. That's right. Great. So above 0.5, and 3 is kind of the ideal window, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and people will even get up into the 5.0. I haven't seen anything that implies that you're burning more efficiently when it's 5.0. As a matter of fact, when it starts getting higher and higher, I've heard patients go, woohoo, I'm at 7.0.
Right.
To me, that means that we're not actually, we're looking at a mitochondrial fatigue where even the ketone bodies aren't getting into the cell and fueling the mitochondria. Okay. So that's when we start looking at specifically nourishing and looking at mitochondrial health, right? So we look at L-carnitine, CoQ10, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C for sure. All the things for the Krebs cycle that we
Yeah.
need, the
Mm-hmm.
citric acid cycle,
Mm-hmm.
because we won't be able to burn and turn those ketones into acetyl-CoA. If acetyl-CoA doesn't get into the tissues,
Right.
then we can't actually use it. So that's ketosis. And so that's very, very different than diabetic ketoacidosis.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I try to tell people nutritional ketosis and ketoacidosis are as similar as nicotinic acid and nicotine. One's going to kill you.
Gotcha.
Right? So when we go into ketoacidosis, that is usually a type 1 diabetic situation because of not producing any insulin at all, an overbuildup of ketones that can start to cause all the things that all the symptoms of diabetes. You get dizzy, you get lethargic, slurring your speech, you can pass out, you could have kidney failure. So ketoacidosis is completely different.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. So does the literature specify like, okay, my blood ketone levels are at 3, and then I'm working really hard at this. I get them up to 7, maybe 8. When does it transition between nutritional ketosis and diabetic ketoacidosis?
What I've seen is around 10.
Around 10. Okay.
Yeah. That's the danger point.
So again, just for our listeners, that's when you have such a concentration of ketone bodies in your blood that now you're getting away from some of the physiologic adaptation for the everyday individual or even the athlete into, okay, now you're doing it too much. Like it's too much. Now you're going to start seeing adverse health effects.
Right. And there's definitely, if someone's getting to that point, again, there's something wrong with the mitochondrial health.
Right.
But again, you can equate it to normal blood sugar of 80 to 85 and blood sugar above 125.
Right. Okay.
One is physiologically therapeutic, and one, you are a diabetic. You could say the same thing about cholesterol, right? We need blood sugar.
Right.
As a matter of fact, when someone is in ketosis, their blood sugar is normal.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that there is no sugar in the blood at all. We need, some level of sugar floating around in the blood for our tissues.
Yeah. And I love what you said earlier too, Doc. In terms of, I think some people, they get with all the hype around, the new cool thing in the health world. And it's like the ultimate goal here is a different fuel source to ultimately make, like you said, acetyl-CoA, which is just our body's most fundamental basic energy molecule, really. And so rather than using glucose to do that, we're just going to use a ketone body. So I just think that's a very, fundamental paradigm shift, I think, for a lot of people. Is like, I'm doing this so I can just have a different energy source.
Yeah, and what I would say is that all we're doing is we're bringing ourselves back to where we were healthy. If we ate carbs, we burned carbs. If we ate protein, we burned proteins. And if we ate fat, we burned fat. And because of our standard American diet, our SAD diet, in this day and age, with all of the preservatives and how it throws off our metabolism, it's very, very difficult now to be able to have that metabolic flexibility of being able to burn whatever we're using, right?
Sure. Yeah, so going back to, okay, so there's ketones in my blood, and I'm trying to get above that 0.5 level there, between that 0.5 and 3.
Yes.
How do I know that I'm there? Or is that something, maybe you've, played with this, you can kind of feel it, I think you were saying, in terms of like you feel this mental clarity, you feel just kind of like a humming energy, if you will. But for the person who's never dived into this, I actually want to do a little bit with myself. Is there a way? What's the most efficient and effective way to actually measure our ketone levels?
The only super efficient way is using blood.
Okay.
And on Amazon, you can get a ketone meter and ketone strips. The ketone meter itself probably runs around $15 to $20. The strips are a little bit more expensive. They're about $5 a piece.
Yeah.
If you could find them. And then you also want to make sure at times, especially when you're trying to get into ketosis, don't worry about measuring first thing in the morning, because that's when our cortisol is up a little bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to mobilize the glycogen into sugars. So it's in the beginning when you're trying to get into ketosis, we are often the least keto first thing in the morning when we're trying to adapt.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So then can you use any different samples of tissue from the body to measure ketones? So people that test using urine, is there a saliva test? What does that look like?
Well, the saliva test only tests pH. And so our saliva is acidic. So using that is not the best meter. The urine samples, when we are trying to adapt and get into ketosis, and they call that keto adaptation, the first thing that we are dumping is acetoacetate. And so we can get a false positive of being adapted in the first couple days because we're dumping acetoacetate,
right.
And although that's technically a ketone, it will measure that ketone body. So if someone wants to use the urine strips, I tell them wait a good 5-6 days. Make sure you're drinking plenty of water so that you're dumping the other ketone bodies, because the real ketone body that we use for fuel is beta-hydroxybutyrate, BHB.
Yes.
So there's 3 ketone bodies. There's acetone, acetoacetate, and beta-hydroxybutyrate. It's the BHB that we actually want to measure. So we can see at times a false positive ramping up of the ketones, and then all of a sudden we see this drop down and everyone gets a little nervous. Sure. But if you're doing blood, you're actually measuring the BHB.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, I kind of want to continue our story of physiology here before we go into our 4 pillars. But since we're just on a roll, so okay, our blood ketones are raising. We're getting into ketosis. I want to go back to what you had said too, because we have our standard American diet, our SAD diet. It can be challenging for our metabolism to make this transition. Is that fair to say?
You bet.
So if our metabolism is conditioned to always using whatever we have, whether it's a carb, most common probably, or a protein or a fat, then it can be challenging. There can be some resistance. Our body's like, okay, we're trying to do this, but we don't want to. Like it's change, right? And who likes change, right? So
yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? Because I know you mentioned the beta-hydroxybutyrate, and I know for some people they're trying to get into ketosis, but it can be tough. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the couple ways to help increase the ketone bodies. Number one is medium chain triglycerides. Medium chain triglycerides will break down very, very quickly into ketone bodies. Medium chain triglycerides will also be very effective at increasing your body's own ability to break down fat into ketone bodies. So the MCTs do 2 things. Number one, it's an immediate source of fuel that your body doesn't have to try to convert. Okay. It gets right into the tissues, right?
Yep.
The other thing that it will do is it actually promotes and helps your body because it's a medium chain. It's a little easier to break down. The liver doesn't have to work so hard, so it's much easier to raise your ketone levels that way. So MCTs are a really good important part of trying to get into ketosis. A high amount of MCTs are in things like coconut oil. So that's why, coconut oil is the big craze right now. So that's one thing. And then there's also straight ketone, or what they call exogenous ketones, ketones in a powder, right? And if we know that someone is having a hard time getting into ketosis and keto adapting, we'll recommend the exogenous ketones to raise the ketone body level. Then we also add some MCTs with that to encourage our own body's production of it. And if we are being compliant with the protocol and we're not adding any carbs, sooner or later the body is going to start working through that adaptation. And start doing that. So sometimes it can take a couple days. Sometimes it could take several weeks. I was very involved in triathlons. I was doing long distance Ironman events. Back in that day, everything was about balancing blood sugar and making sure your blood sugar was just perfect. And all of us, all my clients and myself, we were always making sure we had enough sugar in our bloods, and we actually created an insulin resistant situation as an athlete.
Wow, yeah.
So there we were out after about an hour and a half where we've depleted our glycogen load. We could only take in about 200 calories, 250 calories of carbohydrates an hour, but we were burning 600 to 800 calories an hour. So sooner or later you get into this deficit, and if you don't have the flexibility to burn the fat, you just bonk. Bonk. So it took me several weeks because of that insulin resistance that I created in myself, because I was the person drinking the energy drinks, like the Endura or something like that, all day long, because I had to keep my blood sugar up. And all I did was created a negative situation. Right. So those people who are athletes or athletic, just people who are in the gym 3 times a week, or they're doing their Peloton or their spin class or something like that, but then they're at their desk and they're eating energy bars, they're actually creating that insulin resistance. And so it could be a little harder to get into ketosis because of that. So the exogenous ketones are a great way to help.
Gotcha. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the exogenous ketones, the MCTs, which are the fats, all of those are great tools to just further help someone get into ketosis. And sometimes I think of it this way. It's like, use heaven as an example. Like, everyone's trying to go to heaven and get to ketosis, like this kind of utopian concept. And, if it's not hard enough, it's like, okay, I got to do these MCTs, I got to do this exogenous BHB, I got to work so hard, and then I'll get there, right? Well, sometimes, just to continue our narrative even further, let's say you get there, and then talk us through the Keto Flu, Doc, because now you mentioned insulin, so now you've been working so hard to get into ketosis, and what happens is part of that keto adaptation that you mentioned is that our insulin levels start to really go a lot lower because we're not having all of these carb spikes and these sugar spikes. And so tell us the adaptation there.
Yeah, the Keto Flu has been talked about extensively online, I'm sure. And it's a very simple situation.
Right.
When you're not eating carbs, you're not producing as much insulin. Insulin retains water.
Yes.
So when we reduce our insulin, we don't need the water. So we dump the water. When we dump the water, we are also pulling out electrolytes. So because we're retaining so much fluid, we're also then not only dumping that fluid, but we're dumping the electrolytes. When we dump the electrolytes, our blood pressure goes down and we feel like dirt.
So it's a blood pressure thing. It's not it's an electrolyte thing that's causing a blood pressure thing, not necessarily a blood sugar thing.
That has been almost my experience 100% of the time. That as long as we give our patients enough electrolytes, then as they're dumping the insulin, they'll still dump water, they'll still dump the electrolytes for sure.
Right.
But as long as you're replenishing, you've got everything that you need for your muscles and your organs to contract. Yeah. And our heart happens to be a muscle, so we want our heart to keep beating, and our mind to keep moving. So to me, it's purely and simply an electrolyte issue. Now, with the exogenous ketones, you do have a good amount of sodium in there,
right?
So that's fine. But we also want to make sure that we're giving ourselves the full array of electrolytes.
Sure.
So I like the idea of taking something like an electrolyte drink, specifically with no sugars, and adding that. I love using a magnesium in my drinks to increase, over 300 metabolic processes. But what I have found is if you're using the exogenous ketones and something like the MetaRelax, something like the Endura, or even simply just a pinch of Himalayan or sea salt in your diet, and you make sure that you're getting a good 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams a day, then the Keto Flu will be almost non-existent.
I couldn't agree more. I've actually used the Endura quite a bit since your seminar. I love the product there. And to your point, too, I really think that people should be using something like Endura versus the Gatorades that have the sugars that are going to push you away from ketosis rather than make that keto adaptation. So couldn't agree more with you there. So, Doc, I think we have enough context here so far. Would you agree? I think that's a pretty good narrative. But at this time, again, I think a lot of our listeners are going to fall into that lifestyle or the body comp camp with your pillars here. Can you briefly just kind of gloss over the performance and clinical? Because I know you work with a lot of patients that have major health concerns, and I know you have a lot of patients who are, those Ironman triathletes. But if you can just kind of walk us through there briefly, but then let's spend a little bit of time in the body comp and lifestyle, if you don't mind.
You bet. Yeah, sure. So when I look at the ketogenic diet, it's been researched pretty extensively, and it can be as flexible as you want it to be. So certainly there's the keto lifestyle, which might be more in line with the low carb, high fat or intermittent fastings. We've got the body composition. There's an enormous amount of literature about getting that metabolic flexibility so that we are burning our own body fat. And when we burn our own body fat for fuel, we don't need to take in as much calories, at least for a period of time. When I recommend someone doing the keto diet for weight management, I will have them do that maybe for 4 to 6 months, and then we cycle in and out. The other two pillars, besides lifestyle and body composition, there's the clinical and then there's the performance. For clinical, I recommend it for my patients with traumatic brain injuries like concussions.
Right.
I will use it for some of my patients who are seeing signs of early stage dementia or some sort of cognitive impairment, moderate cognitive impairment, MCI. I will use it for gut issues. I will use it for SIBO or candida issues to knock out all of the sugars. I will use it clinically for type 2 diabetes for sure. That is a slam dunk right there. You can, as chiropractors, I don't know how it is in Michigan, but we're not allowed to say that we treat or cure a disease.
Right.
But what I can tell you is that there have been type 2 diabetics, several dozen in my office, where they are clinically type 2 diabetics, and after going through a protocol, they don't have any of the biomarkers that would diagnose them as a type 2 diabetic. So they are doing some good research on cancer for some types of cancer that are certainly sugar dependent. I will have patients where they come in and do a CAM program, a complementary alternative medicine program. So while they're doing their chemo or their radiation, I put them on a keto diet. They seem to do very well with that.
I'm remembering in your lecture, I'm blanking on it right now, but even historically you said they were telling kids was with this like autism or even ADHD, ADD context, correct me if I'm wrong, but before they had a drug or a more medical allopathic model, they were telling them, look, just do this ketone diet. And then they stopped doing the ketone diet when they had another pharmaceutical solution.
That was for epilepsy.
Epilepsy, seizures.
So in the late 1800s, the ketogenic diet was the diet of choice.
Right.
I don't know if they actually called it that, but it was definitely a high-fat, no-sugar diet. And in the 1920s, when Dilantin came along, they just realized that it was much easier to ask someone to take a pill than to alter their diet. So the ketogenic diet went somewhat underground, although it was very, very successful. And now they are using it again because there are some people, based on their genetics, that the Dilantin doesn't even work. But they are finding that the ketogenic diet works brilliantly. So for brain health, it is very, very effective. And they know now that we used to think that only a very pure, refined source of sugar could enter the brain through the blood-brain barrier. Well, we now know that the brain can be fueled up to 70% of its requirements can be fueled by ketones. Now, the reason why that's important is because as we age naturally and as we age in a healthy way, the normal person will lose 15 or 20% of their ability to utilize sugar in the brain. In someone with some sort of cognitive impairment, whether it's dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, they have over a 30% reduction of ability to use sugar for the brain because the amyloid plaques.
Right.
But there is no reduction in the ability for ketones to pass the blood-brain barrier in the elderly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So for the elderly, it would be the number one diet of choice for brain health.
There you go. Love it. So does that kind of take us through the clinical there?
That's the clinical for sure. On the performance side, slam dunk endurance athletes, the ketogenic diet is number one. And the reason is because with endurance athletes, even at what we call race pace, most people are at no more than 80% of their VO2 max, their full output.
Right.
They've shown that you could be in full ketosis up to 89, almost 90% of your VO2 and still burn your own body fat. So the importance of that for the endurance athlete, we have something out here in California called the Western States 100. It's a 100-mile road run race. It goes from Squaw Valley in Truckee down to almost Sacramento. Auburn is the city. So the amount of climbing, foot climbing is in the several thousand feet, but there are people doing this in 14 hours, I think maybe even faster, and they're in 100% ketosis. So they're running this race on nothing other than water and salts.
It's incredible.
And the reason is, even these high-end athletes with 6% body fat, at 6% body fat, some of these guys may have still about 35,000 calories to burn in body fat. At race pace, they might be running 800 calories an hour. So even after 10 hours, you're only at 8,000 calories. You're not even 25% through your overall fat burning capacity. But that's only if you are in that state of ketosis and you're metabolically flexible enough. The moment you take a gel, the moment you take some sugars, the body just says, "Oh no, I'm going for that so much more because it's so much easier for me to get that," and then you start shifting.
It makes you shake your head and just blow your mind in terms of like all this knowledge out there. There's just all this information and everything, which is good, but then you see this human performance potential that comes from literally, like you said, water and salt. It just makes you, at least for me, it makes me laugh. It's just incredible what the body can do. And, it also makes me chuckle because I'll go to a nice restaurant and I'll pay for an incredible food, an incredible dinner. Like I love a nice steak and a glass of red wine and just like, the experience of eating great food. But then to kind of flip that on the other end of things, I was watching a documentary, I believe, on Netflix where it's like with people who have just chronic health conditions that have been unresolved for just the longest time. They're going to this clinic in Europe and they're paying to be there. But all they do is they starve them, or they don't allow them to eat any food. So my question, Doc, is how do you differentiate like a fast or an intentional intermittent fasting or just fasting for general health reasons and what we might consider like a clinical starvation?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of difference.
Okay.
Right? Because one of the easiest ways to get into ketosis is to fast.
There you go.
And drain your body glycogen. We've got about 2,000 calories stored in our muscles, 1,600 calories in our muscles, 400 to 500 calories in our liver. When we sleep, we burn maybe about 40%, 50% of that. So we wake up with maybe about 1,000 to 1,200 calories still in our glycogen.
Yeah.
So by doing some sort of fasting, we can continue to burn that glycogen down, and our bodies aren't going to start burning fat until we've depleted our glycogen load, let's say a couple times.
Okay.
So one of the best ways to get into ketosis is to just nutritionally fast.
Right.
And I understand the therapeutic value of that, but the compliance for that is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And then over a long term, you still want to be able to get other macronutrients. We still want to get proteins in, even though in a state of fasting, we will reserve our glycogen. Prolonged fasting, I should say, we would reserve our glycogen. We reserve our muscle, and we don't break into our muscle in prolonged fasting. But we still want to be able to get proteins and essential fats at some point. I mean, if you were morbidly obese, in the 60s, they took somebody who was over 400 pounds. They had him nutritionally fast, which meant water and a multivitamin, and that was it all day. And they did that for over 400 days.
Wow.
After that, there was no organ damage whatsoever.
So fasting
and
for over a year.
over a year.
Yeah.
And no liver damage, no kidney damage, no heart damage, no
Wow.
brain damage. And he just lived off the storage reserves of his own body.
Wow.
So at first, when you do the ketogenic diet, you do want to be I'm going to contradict myself. First thing you want to do is you just get into ketosis, however you can, which might mean eating a little bit more fat than you're used to,
Sure.
and eating a little bit more calories. The exogenous ketones help quite a bit.
Right.
Then once you're in ketosis, then I put somebody on a calorie restricted diet, because the goal is to burn your own fat.
Right.
You let them eat enough, but what has to happen is the constant encouragement from someone like you to just let them know you're not going to die.
Yeah.
You're fine. As
Yep.
long as you're hydrated and you're mineralized
Polar.
and you're polar,
And you're polar.
you are going to be absolutely positively fine.
And by polar, what we mean is we're electronegative. We have those minerals. We have that electric charge for our brain to communicate with our body and for neurotransmission to occur. What I also tell people, Doc, is, again, with that everyday general population, mom, dad, whoever it might be, individual. So it's like if they stop eating, let's say at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, I tell them at least try and go at least 12 hours. So if you stop eating at 9, that night, try not to eat again until at least 9 a.m. the next day. If you can make it longer, awesome, go for it. But then this kind of flies in the face of conventional wisdom too, with the whole idea of like breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Here's a question then. Do you differentiate? So if you have an adult or an individual, they're a working professional and, they're just stressed out. So I would recommend intermittent fasting for them as like a lifestyle thing. Okay. What about if you're just in high school, like with kids? Do you also recommend that kids skip breakfast? What does that look like?
It's funny because just recently my high school kid has skipped breakfast. And I remember my mom forcing breakfast on me. And I remember hating it. I just remember just like, I don't know why, but I just don't want to eat. I always feel full when I wake up. And my kid just started doing that as well, but he does eat around 10 o'clock.
Okay.
He has like this break in school, and they have a cafeteria, and he's eating eggs and bacon is his first meal. And then he has his lunch, and then he has his after-school snack before he goes into his sport. And he seems to be doing pretty well. And we have a BIA, a bioimpedance analyzer, and he's staying lean. He's not losing muscle. And he's in track and field, right? Yeah. So it's easy for someone like him to lose muscle throughout the season. So so far it seems to be okay, but it depends. I think it depends. The silly answer is it depends on who you are, how old you are. What I really want to make sure is that if parents are doing breakfast, and I'm fine with that, that we are looking more towards a ketogenic or at least an LCHF, low carb, high fat.
Yes.
So that we can feed the brain.
Absolutely.
So I love the ability of having eggs. The simple ability of I don't cook very well, but I can make an omelet in under 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna have a breakfast, to have some sort of protein with some avocado in there. If you're not dairy intolerant and you want to use cheese as a condiment, or some sort of goat cheese, fine. Yeah. If you want to use some sort of whole sour cream or no fruit in your yogurt kind of a thing, that I think is a great way to go.
Yeah. And Doc, I'm going to link in the show notes here. Metagenics has some great resources just helping people find those recipes that are more keto-based or ketogenic, even if you're going to go dining out to have more of a keto-adapted meal. I think there's some great resources that we're going to link to in the show notes and post on our website here for us, too. Great. I think kind of getting around to our closing discussion here, but it's like specifically going back to the carbs and getting that keto adaptation. So, Doc, you're really trying to get people to have less than 50 grams of carbs a day. Is that right? Or like
That's
keep
right.
it really low? It's not that they can't have any carbs. Is that right?
That's right.
But less than carbs, 50 grams.
Yeah, 50 carbs is really low.
Yeah, it's super low.
So what we're talking about, and the best way to do that and stay satisfied,
right?
Because we could eat a handful of berries, and even though that's low glycemic, you're not going to feel too satisfied from that. So the best way to stay satisfied is with your low glycemic index vegetables, your cruciferous vegetables, your cabbages, your Brussels sprouts, your cauliflowers, your broccolis, things like that. All your basic salad stuff. I love using a lot of sprouts, like arugula sprouts or sunflower sprouts in my salad. So I have a big salad, but not a lot of lettuce, if that makes sense.
Right.
I use things that are lower starch.
Right.
And then the simplicity of some piece of protein,
yes.
Chicken, beef, fish. I have stacked in my closet a whole bunch of cans of sardines in olive oil. And when in doubt, if I just don't feel like I've had enough, I'll open up a can of those, throw that on top of my salad that might already have something else, some other protein, and I feel satisfied, and it keeps me going through the rest of the day.
Do you think it's more difficult for women compared to men to keto adapt?
It does seem to be the case. Interestingly enough, though, women will benefit from as low as a 14-hour intermittent fast.
Okay.
Men show that they get a better result with a 16-hour. So they can actually benefit more from even intermittent fasting for a shorter period of time. But because of hormone cycles and because of how estrogen metabolism and thyroid are intimately related, the thyroid does like to use a little bit of glucose. Because of that imbalance, it does seem slightly harder to keto adapt, but they can do it.
And I love what you had recommended too. I've been playing with this a lot myself ever since your seminar. Like first thing in the morning, tall glass of water, a little bit of apple cider vinegar. I really find that helps me have that good insulin response and just carry that mental clarity with me throughout the day until I choose to have any source of caloric input, really. So I think that's great for people. If first thing when you wake up in the morning, guys, just have a big glass of water with, what would you say, a teaspoon or two of organic apple cider vinegar?
I use anywhere from 1 to 2 tablespoons.
All right, yep.
And I use warm water, and then I use the magnesium from the MetaRelax.
MetaRelax, yeah.
And that gives me the taurine that helps my gallbladder start working better.
Yep.
The thing about the apple cider vinegar is it has been shown to reduce the insulin response of food by 30%.
Brilliant.
So they did a test with white bread, and they found that the insulin response from white bread was 30% less when using apple cider vinegar. So that's my first drink in the morning.
Yes.
Very first thing, warm. I even do a pinch of sea salt in there. And then if I'm going to have coffee, I'll have coffee before I work out or something like that. But my salad dressing, every time I use a salad dressing, all I use is a little MCT oil, olive oil, apple cider vinegar, and salt. And I and that's it. And that's all you'll need. And you will find that when you throw that over the vegetables, it will bring out as many flavors as if you had some very, very fancy salad dressing that you bought over the shelf. So once we do that, now I've got apple cider vinegar again for my lunch, which also reduces my insulin response. So that helps me stay in ketosis. And then usually my dinner meal, I don't have the apple cider vinegar unless I'm doing some sort of vegetables again. Normally it's some sort of warm vegetable because we're able to cook it, and I'll drizzle a little bit of MCTs and some butter, and again some salt on that. And that's my evening.
Brilliant, Doc. I love everything you're saying. I just think there's such a health benefit that can be derived from trying to take even just baby steps towards more of a keto adapted lifestyle. And so I really want to thank you for coming on the podcast here and just bringing this value and this knowledge and expanding it further into the community here. And Doc, where can people find more about yourself and your clinic and everything with yourself here?
I'm out in California, and I have a website. It's www.chirokinetics.com. So CHIROKINETICS.com. My office number is 925-930-0708. And you could reach me through my website if you need to ask me a question.
Awesome. Thanks again, Doc. Again, everyone, we're going to link a bunch of resources and a bunch of show notes and even some of these products that we've mentioned if you guys want to try and actually use this lifestyle nutritional medicine to help make these keto adaptations like we've talked about. And so I hope everyone's received value from here. Once again, our website, MichiganFamilyWellness.com. Doc, again, thanks so much. Honor and appreciation to you. Love that you're a chiropractor. Love that you're feeling polar and gooey for us this morning. And we'll have to have you back on the platform here someday. Thanks again.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Take care.
Thanks.